Is this the clicker that?
I could just be using the keyboard.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm sure everybody's going to be asleep now that you've had this long break and after lunch, so I'll try to be quick. So it's a pleasure being here. I want to thank these guys for coordinating a great event, and it's nice to meet so many people. My name is Lynne Hagen. I'm the coordinator for a county program in Minnesota, the Anoka County program. And for 4 years, I coordinated a research project as part of a large multi-state, multi-university objective. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this project and how Master Gardeners can be a really valuable resource for extension professionals and applied research. And I'm going to talk more about the actual toolkit that we created as opposed to the research, because that's a whole different topic. So this project was a very small portion of a large $25 million USDA NIFA grant. And we had our partnering collaborators included University of Minnesota, University of Wisconsin, Purdue University, Lincoln, Nebraska, Iowa State University. And our objective at the time was, actually I should go back, the project, the whole project itself was for the universities to determine if they could produce some grass-based feedstocks, perennial grasses, for the purpose of developing transportation fuels. And the byproduct of that is biochar, and there's been a lot of buzz around biochar as a soil amendment. And our objective was to determine if biochar was a viable product in a typical home garden setting, for the ultimate goal of seeing if there would be a market for it. If there's a market for the fuels, then could we make a market for the byproduct of the fuels? So for this talk, Pathways to Change, again, I'm not going to focus so much on the research as much as I am just going to be talking about the toolkit. So in the beginning, we start at the beginning. This was a brand new project, and it basically started from the get-go, and part of that is the recruitment aspect. So the first thing we needed to do was find willing volunteers, and so we created an application. And the application explained a little bit about the project, but it also explained what we were looking for in volunteers for the project. And they needed to have some basic knowledge of plant growth and plant care. They had to have some basic skills in diagnostics. So they had to at least be able to identify an insect or a disease. And the detailed organizational and computer skills were really important. They had to be good at creative problem solving, and sometimes they were too good at that. We wanted outgoing personalities. We wanted people to convey what they've learned with audiences in the public. And we were also looking for leaders that had the skills to delegate with other master gardeners. So once we had the application and position description, then we went on to the recruitment portion of that. We created a PowerPoint and presented it to master gardeners around the metro Twin Cities. So my colleague and I presented to over 450 master gardeners in 6 counties. And we thought they'd be so excited that they'd be lining up, that we'd have to have some kind of a lottery to kind of weed away the best from the best. And it didn't quite happen that way, but we didn't have any wait lists, but we did have some really good, strong people in the project. So after the recruitment phase came the part where we needed to equip the volunteers with the project. So they needed to have some information about it. And there were 3 parts to that. And part 1 was to teach them about the actual byproduct, which is biochar. And it gave us an opportunity to work with another specialist, and it was a guy that USDA NIFA researcher from that was a soil scientist, and he had a lot of experience already in biochar research, and He helped develop this great PowerPoint on what biochar is. So it was a great teaching tool. We put that online, made it very accessible for the volunteers. The second part was how to handle the product safely. We learned that biochar is also come in many forms. So it can be very granular down to really fine dust. And what we end up using was kind of a small granular, kind of like the texture of fertilizer. Part of the training on that too is we learned it's also a very combustible material. Depending on how it's stored, you can't store it with fertilizer. So we had to kind of have a worksheet. So we worked with another soil scientist from Iowa State University that created this fact sheet and safety fact sheet for the volunteers. The third part of the training was, let's see, I wonder if I'm jumping ahead of myself here. Okay, yeah, so this was the fact sheet that was created, and I know you can't read it very well. And any of these things that I'm going to show you in this presentation, if you're at all interested in it, you can send me an email and I'd be happy to share any of it with you. So then the third part of the training then was teaching them about the $25 million project. So we expect them to go out to the public to talk about the research. There's a lot of background. So on a $25 million project, they had 9 objectives, and there was different parts from developing switchgrasses to trying to create a market to developing just some really smart people that knew how to convert the biofuels and talk about the pyrolysis process and things like that. So we kind of had to give them a basic of what kind of the little bullet point list was that they could talk to the public about. So, but that ended up being one of the really strong motivating factors for the volunteers to be involved, was all the learning that they gained from being on this project. Okay, so then after the recruitment and training, the next part then was actually developing the plots. So our goal was to create 3 identical plots. We had 3 locations throughout the Twin Cities metro area. We had Arboretum, it was a site, St. Paul campus was a site, and then one of the regional and county offices where I work in the Northeast metro part was another site. Eventually we brought in a 4th site through the Fond du Lac community up in northern Minnesota, and because of they came in a year later, that's another whole story, but primarily our goal was to monitor the 3 main sites. The site up in northern Minnesota became more of a youth project, and that was kind of a whole different thing. But what we wanted to do was showcase what a typical home gardener would grow. So we'd had annual flowers and perennial flowers, we had vegetables, we had herbs. And then Julie Weisenhorn, some of you know her, she's also, I think, on one of the state committees. She was my colleague on this, and she also is a landscape designer, so she came up with the original design. So each site had 1,000 square foot location that had 3 plots each, so it's broken down to 300 square foot plots, identical plots. 1 was a control with no biochar, and then 2 had 2 different applications of biochar. I think in hindsight we got a little overzealous, and because we squeezed a lot into those 300 square foot plots, but they sure look pretty until the Japanese beetles got in. So before planting though, and before planting day, another part of the toolkit is that we needed instructors that would become guides for the volunteers. And as many of you know, our Master Gardener volunteers like autonomy. How many of you know your Master Gardeners like autonomy? So we gave them, I developed this, it turned out to be an 11-page instructional booklet, very much details about every crop that we had in there, how to plant it, when to measure it, how to measure it, when to harvest, things like that. So we had detailed instructions on how to plant even tricky things like potatoes. Not everybody knows how to grow a potato. Asparagus was kind of challenging. Asparagus one is one of those, why did we plant asparagus? Because it takes 3 years, you can't really measure it, it's just ridiculous to have in there in the beginning. But, and then we had also, some plants had multiple harvest dates while some had one. So basil was one harvest date. Well, tomatoes kind of come on and they come on and come on. So we determined to have like 4 different harvest dates for tomatoes. So then we also created a form, and this form was kind of identical to the instruction booklet, and this became a worksheet for the master gardeners to record what they were doing. And again, it was very laid out and step by step and color coded by whether it's control or treatment 1 or treatment 2. And as you know, when you're working with volunteers, you have to make it as simple as you possibly can. And they still kind of like, what? What were you thinking? So, but we did go through trainings with them. We had early meetings prior to the kickoff of the planting season, and it's like herding a bunch of wild cats, and you get 75% of them there, but not all of them are there. But then they show up later, and then they're kind of catching up. But for the most part, it worked out really well. And these worksheets, it was very clear about. On this particular plant, you're supposed to measure, the height of the plant and the width of the plant, or you're measuring the weight. So every site had a scale where we can measure. We also, after we learned in the first year that even though you planted 12 basil plants, at the end of the season you might only have 10 basil plants, and so we wanted to make sure that we were recording weight based on plants and not collectively. So then we had to do the math and make sure that you're multiplying everything by 12 and then dividing by 10 or whatever, do the math. So so we'd have kind of the basic weights and sizes per plant. And as I mentioned earlier, we also recruited for site leaders. So there was a site leader at each location, and some were team teaching, and they were given individual responsibilities. One of the responsibilities was recruiting the volunteers and scheduling them. So we try to schedule it so there's a team of 2 volunteers that kind of adopted certain crops. So one team of 2 they're kind of managing the beans and the tomatoes and the lettuce, and another group was managing the zinnias and the gazanias. And then the site leaders also had the added responsibility of putting all the data that the volunteers recorded on the worksheets onto a Google form that was set up, and try to set that up real easy again. So we had one form that was just for the vegetables and one form that was just for flowers, and had some drop-down boxes and made it real easy for them to just fill in the blanks. So as you know, anytime you work on a research project or any project, in our program, we need to show public value of what we do. And one of our objectives was we wanted to bring this message to, I think our goal was we had to bring it to, I think, 500 people or something. It was all that was put in our original proposal. Well, we knocked that out of the park because we brought it to, I can't remember, 4,000 or 5,000 people or something. And part of that was bringing the research project and the information about the research project to the state fair. So we had kind of this walk by learning poster or display board, because you can't talk to 4,000 people about the biochar project. But we had, kind of 2 different sets. We had one kind of in the beginning of the research project and one at the end. So one was kind of like, this is what we're trying to accomplish. And the other one was, this is what we did accomplish. And then because you can't get people to fill out evaluations and say, well, if based on what you learned, would you plant or use biochar in your garden? I developed a system of having these really cool little glass vases, tall glass cylinder vases, and the little flat glass marble beads, and then had a sign that said, based on what you've learned from this display, if biochar was available in the public market, would you be interested in using it in your home garden? Nice and simple, based on what they're learning. And then the jars were labeled yes, maybe, and no. And it was great. And we had just tremendous results of people, responding to that. So we could go back to our main people at Iowa State University that was housing this whole big research project, and they were pretty excited about those kinds of results. Okay, then lastly, at the end of the project then, our other evaluation is evaluating the volunteers. So over a 4-year period of time, we had quite a few master gardeners that stayed with us from the beginning through the end. We had 79 volunteers throughout the 4-year project. And again, this is over 3 sites. And then I created a survey in Qualtrics and sent it out to the volunteers who were involved, and 43 completed usable surveys. And so the motivating factors for volunteers to serve on this project was their desire to gain knowledge about biochar and to actively participate in applied research. And they also stated that 88% said that they either were very satisfied or satisfied with their overall experience, including the quality of the project, the education gained, and training and communication methods that were used. So, in wrapping up my talk, I just want to summarize how the project was a pathway to change in regards to how to engage master gardeners in applied research. And that is because the success of this was in developing the detailed training materials, equipping the volunteers, and having them successfully carry out the roles. The fact that they appreciated the fact that they had a lot of autonomy in this. They could kind of work at their own schedule, and they were able to follow the instructions without having somebody hold their hands. So they had a lot of flexibility in what they were able to do and how they were able to accomplish the goals as well. So again, they were very satisfied with this. So the takeaways and what we would learn and do differently. And in hindsight, we have less crops, as I mentioned earlier. First year, again, we just kind of were a little overzealous in everything that we measured, and we decided to set a date to harvest kale, which was the end of the season, and this was 1 row of kale. And so we decided after the fact that we would end up harvesting every other plant to leave some in just for the beautification fact, and kale was crazy anyway. But anyway, we would follow the KISS method. If you're not familiar with that, it's keep it simple, silly. And, but we did learn, you know, the positives did outweigh the negatives. And I have to just honor one of my Master Gardener leaders that was involved in this project who got gravely ill in the middle of it. And this project was such an inspiration to her, and she sadly passed away last year after fighting a really bad illness. But she hung in there as long as she possibly could, and she just felt a lot of pride. So I would just encourage any of you that are working with educators that are doing any kind of applied research to think about using this model. And they did gain a lot from it. And I think this is a transferable model you could use for any type of research project. And if anybody has any questions or is interested in any of the training materials, I'd be more than happy to share that with you. My contact information is here. I did bring a booklet that has kind of the details of some of these. If you're interested, it's a 3-ring binder. I can, you know, feel free to come and look at it. Otherwise, I can send them to you. So, thank you.